Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters, and welcome to another edition of SplatterCast. I'm Dylan Newell,
And I'm Luke Janesco.
and today's episode is a little bit of a special one. Definitely a unique genre from what we've been covering. I'd say we've been pretty much leaning on the kind of hairier monsters and stuff like that. So, like we had our conversation about werewolves, and now we've had the abominable. Was an episode we did prior, but now we're getting into a totally different style of horror, something we're both very fond of. But today we're covering From Beyond, and this was a pick by Luke. So why don't you tell us a little bit about this one, Luke? What was the reason for you picking this one?
Well, it's a very slimy and slithery departure from what we've been doing, I would say. Um, you know, we, as anyone who's been listening to this knows, we've been a little touch and go. And I remember kind of formulating our kind of schedule, and From Beyond was on that list. I had been wanting to do it. I'm a huge H.P. Lovecraft fan. It was kind of amplified, especially in our absence, because I pitched to you forever ago where I was really getting into H.P. Lovecraft, and I had come up with a little thing with Cthulhu and all this other stuff. Just the lore there in general really gets me going because there's so much there. And From Beyond is one of those stories where we're going to get into it where this thing's like 7 pages, and we've talked about so many things where they're remakes or source material, and especially when you get into Stephen King, where it's like, where do you kind of go with it? How do you fit everything in? How do you stay true to form? Where H.P. Lovecraft in general, his works, for the most part, are really ripe for those adaptations because they're so much into short stories where, and this is a perfect example where there's only a little bit of source material here, and you really have a lot of room to play. And I think, well, obviously this was my pick, so I'm a fan.
Yeah.
Spoilers. So it's like I think this was done so well, especially when you really dig deep into here, and if you haven't read the story and you kind of realize how much of this is unique storytelling. So this is a really perfect example where I think, especially when it comes to horror and how so many people love to jump into Stephen King stuff, where you can use source material, but you really have to make it your own. And I think this is a perfect example.
Yeah, I mean, this is a first timer for me. I had never seen this movie. You had purchased it when it went on sale before it went out of print on Amazon for what, like $20, something like that.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, so I've had it ever since then. I've never taken it out. Now we're talking what, 2 or 3 years ago now, almost about
Yep.
2 years. So yeah, it's been out of print for a little bit now, and the price has gone up immensely. But I've just still never opened it, still never like checked it out. It's something I want to because I had seen Reanimator only a few years ago, and I loved it. I thought it was really cool, really unique.
Was that during
Um,
quarantine or was that right before?
no, that was right before because I watched that the Halloween before quarantine.
That's right.
Yeah, because I usually like for the show, one of the things that I do every year is I watch on Halloween a horror movie I've never seen before. So that way it's just, something fresh, something fun to do. It's a little tradition I've been keeping with myself for the last like 5 years or so. So, um, but yeah, I'd never seen Reanimator before, but I was blown away. I honestly love that movie. I thought it was a great blend of humor and horror and just gore and everything, and just really a unique take. And I want to say I'm a Lovecraft fan. I haven't really read a lot of his stuff, but I know I'm very familiar with his stories and the lore. I watch a lot of like videos on YouTube and stuff just covering some of his stuff in general and just kind of his inspirations and things. Cthulhu, definitely something that I enjoy too. I thought that was really cool. A movie I wasn't huge on, but I think I'm kind of coming around to it recently, was Underwater, which I thought did
Uh-huh.
a really cool thing with Cthulhu. Spoilers, sorry. But yeah, so I mean, as far as Lovecraft stuff goes, I guess, still pretty, I was still testing the waters in a lot of places, but I would say Reanimator was one of those ones that really got me to jump into it. And then we had Color Out of Space not too long after that released. And so this is just the natural progression for me to come across this film. And, I can't wait to get into it and kind of tell you guys what I thought.
Oh, perfect. Well, that brings us to our perfect topic with something's coming.
Edward, it's running itself! Something's coming.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
really.
I picked. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say really intense opening for sure. But go ahead
Uh,
with what you're gonna say.
I pick that specific soundbite for its sexual connotation since we're dealing with Stuart Gordon. I was like, okay, we have to put that in here.
It's a given. It's definitely a given at this point.
Yeah. So you're talking about the opening. Like this was you hadn't seen this right then since.
No,
Okay,
this
so
was
this
my
was your
very
first
very
viewing.
first time ever seeing this movie.
Um, so as I had said, I'm a big fan of it. So what were your initial thoughts going in? Because seeing Reanimator, I mean, like this is they talk about in the commentary where this is the spiritual sequel to Reanimator, where he brought so many people back. I mean, this is what he wanted to do. They have Bride Reanimators and a couple other ones, but this is really what he sees as the sequel to Reanimator. So I guess for you, how does this hold up?
I mean, this movie's pretty kick ass in my opinion. I enjoyed it a lot. Just getting my first initial thoughts out there. And sorry, I didn't put our background up. But I mean, yeah,
Damn it.
I loved Reanimator. I honestly like. I'll be upfront there. I said it in the opening, but I really do appreciate that movie. It's one of the few that I really like, but I don't own. So I've just kind of have to catch it on random streaming services whenever it's available. But I will soon. I want to get that Arrow edition. But so coming into this, I guess my expectations were high, I would say, because it's like I've already got the exposure, and you do have so much of a returning cast. The writer's the same. Basically, the entire team behind it, I would say, is the same. If I'm not wrong. But yeah, I mean, I didn't know anything about From Beyond as far as the story goes or any of the thing. I just knew it was an H.P. Lovecraft short story. The only thing that I knew before going into it, strangely enough, was that it was only like 7 pages or whatever you said.
Yep.
So it's like, that was something where I was like, cool, that gives you a lot of room to grow. But I think Reanimator wasn't very long either. Or
No,
correct me
they're
if I'm
all. I think they're all pretty much a similar runtime with it's like an hour 20, hour 25, I believe. So it's nothing too long. And this is where, uh, I may have read the Reanimator H.P. Lovecraft. I can't remember. It's been so long, but I don't think that's a short story as well. So it's not too long. And that's where like Stuart Gordon, and Dennis Paoli, the screenwriter, where it's kind of like they know the happy medium here where it's like you get in and you get out. And you're talking about the intense opening for this, and it's like as soon as you open up with this film, you know what you're in for, whether you're either going to be in or you're going to be out, with the resonator turning on, the little eel like things floating in the air. It's like you know what you're in for here. There's no easing you into it. So it's like that first 5 minutes, you are either going to love this film or you're going to turn it off and it's not for you.
Yeah, it's all gas, no brakes, pretty much from the second it starts, because he really just kind of cracks the code right then and there and gets the machine going and everything. And like you said, the eel creatures show up, and before you know it, he's got Dr. Pretorius, I believe. Yeah,
Yes.
Pretorius. He gets brought into the situation, and what a weirdo! Like, honest to God, like that's one of those things where it's like, so kind of going into it with the Stuart Gordon, I know that he's definitely, you understand, like, I guess working with him, you kind of have the understanding that if you're making this movie, um there's going to be a lot of gore, a lot of nudity, and a lot of just weird tentacle sexual acts done. And this guy is definitely like the kinkiest monster antagonist, I think, of all of cinema. If I'm wrong, then you can say whatever, but before he was a creature and after he turned, like, just very 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 uncomfortable. Like, just I'm just sitting here like, what a strange and interesting overall antagonist to have.
Yeah, and
Just
that's where it's interesting because it's like he's taken out so early on. It's like you only get glimmers of what he was like before he was killed, and then taken over from beyond. You know, whatever it is. Um,
mhm.
you can tell he's kind of a shady character, a little skeevy. You know,
Oh yeah.
is from what you do see of him, and you know the BDSM stuff. You know, he's not on the up and up. I do love that where it's like you only get to see a little bit of his actual personality before he's murdered. So it's like you only get that little bit of dynamic, and I love that like Crawford is totally on board with him, thinking he's a genius. And it's like anyone looking at that situation can tell this dude's horribly insane.
Yeah, I
So it's like you only get a little bit of that dynamic, and like how Crawford is still attached to him, even though it's not him anymore.
mm.
I love that dynamic that they bring throughout the rest of the film.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, just there's one sequence of dialogue that actually stuck out to me is I believe it's definitely I think I don't know if it's in the hospital before they go back to the house or when they're back at the house, but Crawford's talking about Dr. Pretorius and how he would just have all these beautiful women and everything come over and be around him and at his house all the time and everything. And just he's like it always worked out the same way basically, where they'd come in, lavish dinners, nice wine, dancing, all this always would end in screams. And it's
yes.
just like, oh god, like that's just really it's stuff like that where you can tell like this is a very well written movie, I will say. I think that the pairing between Stuart Gordon and his writer, who the name is escaping me at this moment,
That's Dennis
Dennis
Paoli, I believe.
Paoli, yes, Dennis Paoli. Like, they you just really see like they work really well together because that was, in my opinion, perfectly delivered by Jeffrey Combs, and it really sets that tone without even him having to be a monster at that point of just what a sleazeball this guy is and just what he is capable of before he's even been taken over or brought to the beyond. And
Yeah.
yeah, I just think that that was probably some of my favorite one of my favorite lines, I would say, coming out of this movie would just be that because it was just so it told you everything you needed to hear, just to get
And
it.
And it's like, you know, you could definitely tell Dr. Pretorius was some sort of sociopath with how he's able. I mean, looking at him, he's an older gentleman, and he's getting all these beautiful women to do all this BDSM stuff and come over to the house, and how Crawford is attached to him. And even when later on in the film, when he has been taken over and he's talking to Catherine already, and you know, she's kind of enamored with him, whether that's the resonator or just his personality in general. It's like, you know, they never really dive into in the short story, or, you know, I don't think there's ever been someone coming right out and saying it, for either Stuart Gordon or Dennis Paoli or anyone saying, you know, as soon as someone's taken over, we kind of um their attributes are still in there, but I feel like, you know, the way that he speaks and kind of can get people enamored with him is really kind of how he was previously before his death. So
Mhm.
that's kind of how I always read that, because it's just like, you know, speaking to him, he's so confident, and you just become so enamored in his dialogue. And I think that that is a credit to the writer, because it's like his dialogue in there, when he pops up on screen, you can listen to him talk for minutes on end, as you know, that whole setting of with the lighting, you know, in the attic with the resonator going. I think that really adds to the dialogue that he kind of delivers there.
Yeah, I think they really nailed it as far as just our antagonistic character in the story, just like with him, just it's layered, like I mean, just look at everything we've described, just these first 10 minutes of talking about the movie. I mean, like for somebody who really, I would say probably has maybe five minutes of screen time through the whole movie. Like, I mean, he's a really impactful villain and just a really impactful sight. I mean, we'll get into it a little bit later into our creatures features segment, but I mean, the prosthetics alone really make him something unique and something to, kind of like you will take that away with you with the movie when you see it, just like being like, wow, that was just like, if anything at all, that's very effective and very unique prosthetics and special effects.
And one of the
But
one things,
it's definitely on par with like John Carpenter's The Thing in a lot of ways
yes.
too. Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I did want to bring up, seeing Reanimator first and then seeing this, and I think it's also prevalent, even though Stuart Gordon didn't do Color Out of Space, but I could definitely see this film being a blueprint for Color Out of Space,
Oh yeah.
where Reanimator heavily green. I mean, that's what we're going with there. That's what you think of when you think Reanimator. And for Stuart Gordon to do that film and then immediately follow up with this one, where we have the pinks and the violets in this film, where we rely so heavily on it with that resonator, it's like, I love that he kind of almost color coded his films.
Oh yeah.
And that's where it's like, thinking of both these films, I just absolutely love it, because it's like, just thinking of each one, it's a very specific color, and you don't see that enough, I don't think, with a lot of directors.
No, and I mean that's something that you got to be very conscious about too. I feel like, art direction and color, they really go hand in hand with, sending up tones and just what you want your film to come off like. And I think, like, that's something that we discuss when we're doing shorts or when we're, writing scripts and things like that, is, because I tend to write more from a directing standpoint, as far as like I can give broad ideas, but as far as like character moments and details, I'm not the best with that, but I can tell you exactly how I'd want to shoot it to bring out emotions and bring out, the visual storytelling. And it's just one of those things where it's like, you can tell that they're firing on all cylinders with both of these films. And I think that's why they make such a great pair, is because like you can tell that like Stuart Gordon has everything worked out in his mind, how he wants to shoot it, how he wants to show it. And then you just have Dennis Paluya, or Paluya,
Paoli.
Paoli. My bad, I'm gonna butcher that every time probably. But yeah, you can tell that he just knows these characters and knows how to write them. I'd say the only real criticism you could throw at it is just how similar the characters are from Reanimator to this, when it comes to obviously Jeffrey Combs' character being a scientist in Reanimator and a scientist in this. It's not necessarily an interchangeable performance, but you could see shades of both. So
Yeah.
I don't think he had to jump too far, where he's not less erratic and more reasonable and not so aggressive in this one as he is in Reanimator, I would say. And I don't mean that in like he's like, physically aggressive. I just think in Reanimator he's definitely a bit more, like, I'm a know-it-all. I know how to handle myself and what I'm doing and all this. You know what I mean? He's the man with a plan. As to where this one, he is very traumatized. And I think that's where I can witness the juxtaposition in performance here, but I would not fault anybody for calling that out.
Yeah.
Personally.
And I mean, like we talked about at the very beginning here, where a lot of these are, this is based off a short story that is about 7 pages. And honestly, I think Crawford is the only character in that appears in the short story and in the film. Everyone else is made up. So it's like they really took a big liberty here and kind of just casted their own characters to try and see how they kind of meld all together. And you're talking about Jeffrey Combs, so it's like it's kind of an all-star lineup here. So we're recording this, and I almost didn't make it because I had to run to the store because I had to make my famous vegan potato salad for
Okay.
the block party on Benevolent Street. I love Jeffrey Combs in this because it's like most of the stuff that he does. I mean, he has the dialogue, but there are so many looks he just gives in this movie, like that that little thing of him just getting out and staring back at the house, I absolutely love, because he says nothing and it's everything at once, just
If,
with that look.
if I can hop on a soapbox for Jeffrey Combs real quick, since I want to make the connection here that, as we're airing these, Abominable was our last podcast, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, that was.
Yes.
And so that had a small cameo by Jeffrey Combs. And now we have this from Beyond. So you can tell we're big fans of the man, but what a character actor. Like, seriously, like, the man has all of my respect in the world. He's a genius. I think, like, in this genre of film, especially, like, I would say just genre films in general, whether he's in a movie with no money or one of the biggest budget productions he could ever be put in, he's going to give a unique performance. And I think you can see that perfectly juxtaposed between our last film and this. I mean, like, the
Yes.
man's a genius.
And it's like, looking at him, he's not talked about nearly enough, even today, where it's like, props to Stuart Gordon, because he really did a lineup of heavy hitters here.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
it's like, none of these actors are talked about nearly enough, because anything that they're in, they legitimately steal the show, and they're always a pleasure to see. And to kind of, again, go back and Crawford is the only one in the short story, so it's like, to create Dr. Catherine McMichaels, to create Bubba, also in the cast them with who they did. I mean, my gosh, just this would be like, if this was coming out now and you told me who was in this film, I'd be like, I don't even need to know anything about this. I just want to see it, because it's an
Yeah,
all-star
I mean,
cast.
Barbara Crampton coming back into it again, working with Stuart Gordon. You have the two from Reanimator. That's great. But yes, I mean, you dropped it. I was looking for kind of a weaving point into this to start talking about him, but Ken Foree. Honestly, I had the Blu-ray sitting on my shelf wrapped up for like I said, a couple of years at this point. And I never knew he was in it until I sat down and watched it.
Yeah.
And that was such a welcome surprise because I absolutely adore Ken Foree. Like, this man has been in so many, like, if you guys don't know who he is, like, you need to do a deeper dive into your horror stuff, because, like, this guy is a legend. I would say he's up there with a lot of the bigger greats as far as these, like, do you even want to say underground horror kind of things? Because I'm like, he's been in some of the biggest ones there are. Like, I mean, the original Dawn of the Dead is where I would say he really got his first, like, start. And, like, even then, that's a great performance. Him as Peter, like,
My
holy
gosh.
shit. Like, it's like he came onto the scene and he never left. I mean, the man has, like, let me see how many credits this guy's got to his name.
But
112 acting credits.
and he still, for me, seems like he's overlooked. It's
I
very
know.
odd.
Rob
'Cause
Zombie, though, he didn't forget. Say what you will about his movies, he doesn't forget.
And that's where it's like, Halloween for me is trash, but is his name Joe Grizzly?
Yes, Joe Grizzly. I'm Joe
Like,
Grizzly, bitch.
I absolutely love that character. I like that. For me, I was so depressed when he's
When
spoilers
he
killed, but it's like, I would have loved to have seen him. Like, if he wanted to take a different take on Halloween, give me that character in that space, and I will be 100% on board. There is, me and you have talked. There's a werewolf property that we have, and there's a truck driver in it, and that is an inspiration. Like, right there, Joe Grizzly was the inspiration to that. Whereas, like, I had always wanted to see something like that, and I was like, I seeing Halloween. That's the only thing I take from Rob Zombie's Halloween, is I'm going to see more of that character.
I want to
And I
steal
think he
Joe
plays it
Grizzly and
perfect.
throw him in the movie.
And it's like, there's so many cameos in it that I think a lot of people get, but I think Ken Foree is one that goes overlooked for a lot of people.
I'm sure it does. I mean, when we're recording this, so, like, just so you guys can get a timeline with us, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness just came out. And, like, since we're talking about overlooked, like, it's so weird, like, going in there, because I go opening night. I'm a huge fucking MCU nerd, like Luke knows, he can tell you. You know, I collect literally action figures of these characters. Like, that's how big of a nerd I am with it. But I also collect my horror action figures. But
The balance.
the point that I'm gonna get at here is that movie's directed by Sam Raimi. And if you're in the horror community, you know Sam Raimi. He's a god, a legend. He's one of the greats. If you're talking about top 5 horror directors, I'm gonna say that he is in that, maybe even top 3. And this movie has so many references to his works and things like that. And, you know, I love it. Every Marvel reference hits, the audience freaks out. Then there's little moments, little Sam Raimi isms in this. And you haven't seen it, so I won't spoil anything, but there are moments. There's one big one towards the beginning of the third act that if you know Sam Raimi, you know exactly what this is. And I was the only one in the theater to give a little chuckle or like a little bit of praise. I was like, oh, look at that. Oh shit. And I was just like, I realized I'm the only one fucking doing it in a packed theater. So it's like, yeah, it's one of those things where I would definitely say that like you get little bonuses like that going into movies and knowing your shit. So like Ken Foree is always a welcome surprise. Just like, you know, we have Sam Raimi coming in and working on such a big film, you know, like another superhero project after years of not doing it. And like just to have normal audience goers just doesn't even phase them.
Yeah.
And it's
And
just
see,
so upsetting.
and I think that's like a perfect comparison where it's like, Sam Raimi, we know what he's done other than Spider-Man. And it's like, I think and that's why I want to, you know, I'm pretty much over the whole Marvel thing after, you know, the phase that we went through.
I'm not.
But I want to see the new Doctor Strange because Sam Raimi's directing it. That's why I want to see it. Everyone in that theater, well, not everyone, but 98% of those people are there because it's Doctor Strange, not because it's Sam Raimi. And I think that's kind of, you know, you ask most of those people, they're like, who's Sam Raimi? I have no clue, you know, and where it's like, they don't get the due for what they've done. You know, they're just kind of a face or, you know, a property at that point, you know? So it's like, I think that's a good comparison where it's like, you know, you see Ken Foree and a lot of people are just like, I don't know who that is, you know, when he's got a great body of work behind him, you know? So, I mean,
yeah, and I 100% agree with that. Cause I mean, like, it is one of those things where it's like he is so recognizable. I mean, he even has little bit parts in like Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. Obviously, he's going to show up in there, but he plays the televangelist, if you remember that. Um, like that's towards the beginning, and I believe he's in the credits. And I think there is one sequence towards the beginning in the mall where he's talking, and like even as a kid, like I recognized his face because I saw that movie when I was pretty young. But it was
yeah,
just one of those things where it was like, at least to me, being in the horror sphere for as young as I was, and just being very passing and like getting on Chiller whenever they did their Halloween marathons and stuff like that, and just watching random horror movies. Like, you know, his face had come across my screen so many times that like it was just one of those things where it's like I grew up with him and knew him. So it's like for me, he's a very recognizable face. But again, I agree. It is just one of those things where it's like, it just sucks that like I feel like he'll never get the appreciation from a broader audience that he deserves.
yeah,
And
because
this movie's a perfect example of why he deserves it. He's great. I love
yeah,
Bubba.
and that's where it's like, you know, he was in good stuff, but it's like to look at like Dawn of the Dead and to look at this and to know like he's such a believable badass that it's just like I wish he had even more mainstream stream stuff than he did because he is so much more than capable of being a leading man in a lot of different things. And it was just kind of, you know, I especially in the 80s and 90s, like nowadays we're kind of getting to that point where talent is recognized to a certain degree, but like not 80s and 90s was kind of just like thrown by the wayside where it's like there was so much potential that just never came to fruition, you know. But in this, he melts perfectly in that dynamic, and it's like that's one of the things I do love about this film. It's so contained, it's so small, where it's like we're in a house, we're just with a couple of characters. It's nothing huge or off the charts, you know. It's just like we keep it small and we keep it contained. I feel like we get way more intimate with it, you know, in more ways than one. But so it's like it's just a perfect dynamic in here. I mean, Barbara Crampton in this is like her and Jeffrey Combs are just, I mean, they're a perfect match.
Mhm.
And such a believable couple, I think. It's like you always want to see them together. And again, I don't think any three of them fully got their due as to what they were capable of doing.
No, I agree. I mean, they definitely have their bodies of work as well. Barbara Crampton, I know, has been in a lot of she's also one of those people that's been in a ton of horror that has really just kind of like I feel like she doesn't get her, due either, but like I mean, she's in movies like I think she's in Body Double, isn't she?
Um, I can't
I'm
remember.
pretty sure that's De Palma. Yeah. Yes,
Yes,
she is in Body Double.
body
So
double.
she was she had a smaller part in that, but she was, one of those actresses that, another recognizable face, fantastic, but I guess just never really got, as much, I guess, and it's hard to say because like if I talk to a horror fan, obviously they're gonna know who Barbara Crampton is, but it's again not like a Scarlett Johansson or anything, like
Yeah,
not very recognizable. But I mean, even looking through her body of work right now, we're talking about like Chopping Mall. She obviously did From Beyond, Reanimator. She was in Castle Freak as well, another Lovecraft. So she really likes to stick to that the Lovecraft stuff, I'm noticing. And then
and she
she's
was.
even in Your Next, which is from 2011. So it's one of those
And
things where it's like she's always kind of stayed in the horror community, but she's never been like let's bust out and do all of this. Like let's do a big one. You know what I mean? She's not gonna pop up in like a Halloween or anything like that.
yeah, which is a shame. She was in. You haven't seen Jacob's Wife yet, have you?
No, I have not. I saw that
Uh,
you bought that though.
yeah. Highly recommend. And that's a film where you can really see what she's capable of doing. Because it is
Mhm.
centered around her. And they
I
do give
see.
her uh, a lot to do in that film. And it's like, uh, that's where you can really see that's like she should have had some more main roles to really, give her something to chew on, because she's more than capable of doing it. And it's like looking at all three of these actors, and it's just like, man, just to think of the opportunities that could have been, especially now where, film was such a big undertaking in the 80s and 90s, where it's like if you didn't have a budget for it, it's not going to get made. But like looking at something like Jacob's Wife, where it's a smaller film and um, it got made, and you can really see what Barbara Crampton is capable of doing when they give her a script centered around her. And it's like
Mhm.
that's what I would hope for the rest of these actors, where it's like nowadays, if they're still, I think they're all still in the game, from my knowledge. So it's like to
Yeah, I
kind
don't
of
think
give them
anybody
a,
has really passed away. At least out of the three we've talked about, they're all still
yeah,
alive.
they're all
So.
still around. So it's like to
Mhm.
have them kind of, especially in this space of different offshoots of horror that are, you know, we see more often now than we did, 20 years ago. So it's like to kind of hopefully they can all find their own space in the horror realm, because I know me and you both want to see them. I think that's the consensus in the horror community. It's like, hey, give me give me a film starring each one of these actors and I'll watch it. So it's like that's my hope for like the next few years is they can all find their little films that they can kind of have their own space in the horror community.
Really give them the big final send off that they deserve for sure. If you want to call it that. But like, yeah, I think that it would be great if you're, working with A24 or anything like that, and you want to have a reliable cast. I would definitely say pull from this movie because these people are not praised enough, in our opinion. Um, but yeah, I mean, like, I really just I think that this movie is terrifically cast. I mean, we've been talking about it for a few minutes now, but like I think we should kind of dive into the film itself a little bit here. So I'm gonna let you take it away here and kind of see. So, if we're getting into this movie, what are other than the cast and everything like we've been talking about technically, what would you say is like one of your biggest draws for this film in general? Is it just the fact that it's a borderline Lovecraft? Well, it's not borderline, but it is Lovecraftian creature feature, or are you more into it for like does this movie genuinely disturb you in any way, shape, or form?
Well, it's like it's a perfect I think for me it's a perfect balance where we've talked about it where I don't like anything necessarily over the top, But that perfect kind of marriage, and I think From Beyond does that in terms of storytelling and kind of getting to know your characters, as well as with the different kinds of gore and kills that it does. I don't think it does an overlay of anything.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like, for me, this hits on all different kinds of points, But, some of the score is pretty crazy. So we have a lot to choose from. So let's get into eye socket Slurpees. Oh, that seems pretty horrific.
Yeah, I didn't not know what the hell to think when I saw that. When he spits the eyeball out and everything, I'm like, Jesus Christ, man. And he just starts going to town, like, oh my lord. Um, yeah. If you want to talk about gore, this film's got a little bit of gore. And I
And
would say it's very entertaining with that.
And I think it's perfect because it's like you watch this movie and probably what for the first, I don't know, 40 minutes there isn't like a ton of anything. Like you have that first, at the very beginning where it's like I think it's even off screen, the Dr. Pretorius, you just come back to him and
It
he's
is off
headless.
screen. Yeah, you do just kind
Um
of stumble into his headless corpse. So
and then you kind of see like with Crawford, who gets bit at the very beginning by one of those floating eels, and then Bubba gets bit in the arm by like one of those tentacle creatures. But it's very minimal up to a certain point where it's like we're really focusing on building the foundation here of kind of building up to what we're going to get to, because like what we had just seen in that little clip there, that's way later in the film. And that's probably one of the goriest scenes in that, so it's like I think that's one of the things that draws me here, where it's like there's not an overlay of um crazy gore at the very beginning. We're earning it all the way up into a certain point here. It's like, yes, at the very beginning we kind of go into it, we want to tell you what this film is about, so you can either be on board or you might want to hit the bricks. And then we slow it down after those credits and we kind of build back up to everything, and then at a certain point it's balls to the wall.
yeah, I would say this movie for a good portion of it is more tentacly and more slimy in
Yeah.
its special effects rather than its gore. But I mean, when it does get gory, it gets gory. I just want to say, I think the highlight for me, as far as like the gore scenes go, like it's definitely Bubba's death, Ken Foree. Like,
Yeah.
that caught me off so hard because like I did not expect him to die right there. I expected him to die. I expected all of them to die actually, but when he goes the way that he goes with those little, what are they, bugs? They're like some kind of
Yeah.
minuscule
Be like
critter.
creatures, I guess. I don't know exactly
Yeah,
what they
there's
are. They don't
something,
really
but
dive into it.
they when they swarm him and just completely start like just pulling him apart, and then he's just like literally dissolving almost in front of them. It is just really really impactful, and just the way that they handle that going forward, just like showing you the what's left of him, where it's just like his chest is like all concaved and you just see the bone and everything below him. It's really some effective stuff. Like I was
That is
definitely
such
like, oh, that's a shocking death. That was the one that really stuck with me.
For me, like that is the epitome of 80s filmmaking, like horror filmmaking, of him laying on the ground like that. Obviously we know the tricks where he's laying underneath, the prosthetic and his head's poking out. It's like that for me, that stuff I absolutely love. Like that's what I'm on board for. Um, the way they make it look is just so gruesome. It's This film is like very wet, very slimy. You know what I
Yes,
mean? Like
yeah,
everything's
yeah.
dripping, and that's what I love, where it's like this kind of grossness coming through the film, and it's perfect. It's like you don't get enough of that anymore, I don't think. So it's like, especially when you see Bubba and he's just laying there and he's bones, he's still like wet, and it's just like it adds to the grossness for me. Same thing with Dr. Pretorius, where it's like he's always very slimy, slick looking, very almost eel-like, I would say, you know, and it's like, I think that adds, I mean, we have that little photo up there, the little gif going, it's just like, even there, he looks wet, you know what I mean? It's just like, it adds to the grossness of this, and I think it's so minimal that it could go overlooked by, you know, just a basic viewer, but there are people out there that appreciate it.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely it leaves if you appreciate special effects in any way, like it definitely it leaves an image. And I think the just in general, it's the what is the gland? It's the whatever gland that
The
is
pineal gland?
pineal
Is that what
gland.
you're
Yes.
looking for?
Yes, all that
Yeah.
with it just busting out of his forehead and coming out and everything, like, for both him and Jeffrey Combs, like, it is just one of those things where it's like, that made me uncomfortable the entire film when that was going on, just seeing all that and how it works, and, like, the visceral, like, the Jeffrey Combs really sells that really well too with the prosthetic. Um, Nowadays they do that. I'm sure they would use CGI, and you would just not get the same effect because when that prosthetic is working, Jeffrey Combs is just really selling that like his whole head, brain, and all is just like going through something or changing or like being strained in some way.
Yeah.
And I think it's
And
a
that's where it's
really
like,
effective prosthetic.
and like looking at that clip that we had just shown, it adds to the disgustingness of like he's sucking her brain out of her eye socket, and that little pineal gland is just like it's like moving. You know, it's like laying on her head, moving. It just adds to the invasiveness, you know, of what is happening. You know, it's like Stuart Gordon meant for it to be sexual. He had said he wanted to see how many phallic shapes we can get into this film, and it's like, you know, he kind of wanted that where it's uncomfortability, you know, where it's like, ugh, you just want away from that whole situation, you know. And like you said, Jeffrey Combs sells it very well. Like in in a lot of those scenes, especially like when it first came out of his head, it's like almost like a climax for him, you know, where it's like, and I think that's how Stuart Gordon wanted to treat this. And it's very unsettling to a viewer, I think, without actually um, overstepping a boundary to make you check out. You know what I mean? So it's like, I think he kind of balanced it perfectly for this. You know, he knew what he was doing 100%.
Oh yeah. I mean, like coming off of Reanimator, I would hope so. Cause I mean, like he was able to convince us that a severed head was still, moving and talking, just sitting in the pan. And like you said, very simple effects here, very simple tricks that they're using for things like Bubba's death and that. But like um where it really gets complex is definitely once you start getting into like Dr. Pretorius and stuff, just his constant every time we see him, he's evolved a little further. And by the end of this film, he is just this, gelatinous, pussy, boily mess that is just really unsettling. And he's still just as big of a pervert as he was before, and I'd say maybe even more so now. So it's just really uncomfortable stuff for Barbara Crampton to be. It's like Jabba the Hutt if he was like 35 times worse.
Yeah. And he just like
Like
keeps growing and growing
mhm.
throughout this film. And I love the usage of that. And I mean, he really is the centerpiece of this entire film to kind of keep it moving, where it's like they kind of keep going to the attic. So it's like, you know, if we're talking about it, we might as well jump into a deep dive into the Pretorius monster with creatures, features. Oh
Truly
man.
wicked special effects. Yeah, I mean, just like you can see how much effort was put into it, even in just those basic ones alone, where he's still mostly human.
And it's like you can totally tell that this was inspired by the John Carpenter's The Thing. You know what I'm? It's just like looking at those effects. I think every effects, special effects person in the '80s was inspired by The Thing. Just like to look at it and to kind of model things after it. And the special effects artist on this was John Carr Beekler,
Mhm.
who directed Friday the 13th, Part 7.
Oh yes.
Um,
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful film. But it's like this, the Pretorius monster is so well done here. I think it's for me. You can put it up against anything done in the '80s, and it matches up. It doesn't feel out of place. They really took care of this monster to make sure it aged perfectly, and I think that's kind of one of the things here where you were talking about. A lot of stuff they would rely on CGI, which they would nowadays. They talk about it. The screenwriter talks about, I think it was one of the producers, really emphasized that everything had to be practical. It's like that's where you get your most mileage out of. And he agreed with it. And he said, nowadays they would probably do something different where it's back then, yes, they agreed with that, but they were married to it. There was no way around it, and it's like we've talked about it a billion times on this podcast where if mid 80s, if From Beyond was heavily leaned into CGI, I probably couldn't watch it because it would just be dated
No.
so quick. But it's like everything in there ages so well. And like I said, with Bubba's death, it's perfectly 80s. It's like that's what I'm watching for. That's what I want out of these films. And same thing with the Pretorius monster. It looks perfect. It's slimy. It's gross. That's what I want in my horror monsters.
It really just leaves a nice lasting effect, and like that 80s like kind of feeling that you're talking about, like almost like it's not like a nostalgia type thing. It is truly its own kind of sense. Like when I'm looking for like specific creature features like themselves, or like movies with really great special effects, I normally try to lean more towards the 80s and early 90s, because it's like you still have a lot of that practical effects and things like that still widely being used. Yeah, because once you start getting to the mid 2000s, it's like it's all starting to go to CG.
Yeah.
And it's just because it's becoming more affordable at that point. And yeah, I agree with you. I think I will always probably agree on this, and it's like I'm someone who's not even afraid to use CGI for any project. If it's necessary, you use it. But there's a lot of these films that it would not be necessary. And this one, although it might save you some money, I just think that The Thing 2011 is the perfect example of what happens when you take effects like this and you run them through a computer, because you lose all detachment, you lose all of the
Yeah.
visceral kind of body horror that you're looking for. Could you imagine Cronenberg's The Fly if it was CGI? No, you couldn't, because it wouldn't have the same effect. And it's just like this movie's a perfect example of just why you do it, why you go that extra mile, because the Dr. Pretorius, and if we're talking features, the creature in the basement, the worm, all
Yes.
of that, that really all it sells and lasts and still looks great today. For it being an 80s movie that they've rendered to HD and everything and brought onto Scream Factory, it's like it all looks convincing and real.
Yeah, and even like the tentacle monster that latches onto Bubba, it's only on screen for a very minimal amount of time, but with that type of stuff, you can do a close up with it, and it looks legitimate, and I love it. It like really sets the tone, and that's where it's like I do think you get a difference in acting when it's right there. That monster's right in front of you. You can react off of that. It's not something where, we'll do it in post. You'll see what you're acting against here later on. You know what you're in for. You're right there with it. And I think it adds so much more to the actual scene itself where, we talked about Abominable and they went more practical with a lot of their stuff. The director there was adamant that we want to go practical. And it's just weird how, what that was 2005 and
2006.
2006, and this is 1986. It's like within that 20-year range. It's like they're married to practical in 1986 because that's all they have. They have to do it. And then in 2006, it's like, oh no, we want to go practical because it's almost a novelty at that point where it's like, oh, everyone's doing CGI, so that's the norm. But we know that we want to do the 80s stuff, so it's like it's just weird, where how the progression, just because we progress in technology doesn't mean it's the way to go, because it
Absolutely.
hasn't worked out.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think that's the Jurassic Park line. Do you ever, just because you guys could, did you ever stop to think that you should? But yeah, I mean, like, I think, we'll be beating a dead horse by saying it, but yeah, it would suffer leaning on CGI because really they are effective as all can get out. Like, it's a very visceral scene in the basement when they're trying to pull the plug and the power, and that worm is there and it gets Jeffrey Combs. I thought he was dead at first. Like, I thought that he was gone, but no, that's just him being consumed by the beyond and coming out even more consumed a little bit and then going on from there. And I think that, like, as far as those go, I'd say that and the Pretorius monster are the highlights for me in this section as far as creature features go, because they truly are impressive pieces of work, and it's awesome to see them just able to be presented in HD quality and still give you that sense of just, wow, look what I'm looking at here.
What version of the Pretorius monster is your favorite? Because we throughout this entire film, we're kind of being introduced to different versions of him. So, like, for you, which one is the best? Like, which one do you think of the most when we're talking about this film?
I think about that cover, that Scream Factory cover, a lot
Yeah.
when I think of this movie. So I'd have to say that final form. But I do like when he's kind of half and half. Not so much when that clip we showed where he's pulling off his face, but when it's a little bit up his arm and everything, and he's starting to get consumed. You know what it reminds me of? A little the SplatterCast lost episode. If you guys want to try to find it, Slither. Very much, and I can't believe I'm just bringing this up, but it's the perfect segment to do it. But this movie, in general, gives me Slither vibes.
Yes, and I was going to bring that up as well. Because my favorite version is when when he pops back up and half of him is Dr. Pretorius. He's not facing them yet, and then finally he turns around and we see the other half is like almost like melting. Full on Pretorius monster right there, and the other half is totally fine. That right there, perfect, looks exactly Slither style. It's like that is. I'm curious if this. I know because we had done research on that film, and I was trying to think back and get into my brain here to think if that was ever mentioned. I don't think it was, but it's like this is such a close version of that, and like Slither's like again. James Gunn he's got that wetness, that grossness to oh my gosh, what's his name?
You're talking about Grant?
Yeah, Grant, right?
Yep.
So it's like, he's got that very similar style there. So I was curious I don't think he said he was inspired really by anything at that point, but I think we kind of questioned that at some point. But
absolutely. I mean, whether or not he's talking about the story, sure, it's space worms. I mean, like, it's been done, before. He's just put his own little twist on it. He could say he's not inspired by it. He's, just basically pulling a general idea. But are you serious by saying that you weren't at least a little inspired by From Beyond when, especially with that final form for Dr. Pretorius and the final form for Grant, where they're just this again pussy, slimy mess of a person that's just slithering around. And I mean, like, that's what they're doing. So it's like I'd have to say that if he hadn't seen this movie, then that's one of those rare moments where it's like they never saw it, they never heard about it, it just came out of their brain, and it just so happened to be like this other thing.
Yeah.
But I'd have a hard time believing it, especially with how much of a horror fan James Gunn is, that he hasn't seen this movie. Like, I mean, I couldn't believe that.
And for me, I would say I think the Pretorius Monsters probably, honestly, has to be, in my opinion, the most underrated monster in any horror film. Just because I don't know if From Beyond is necessarily seen by a lot of people. I don't know if it's because of the availability to it. I mean, it is streaming on a lot of different platforms, but again, the Blu-ray is very hard to get a hold of as we sit here today. So I don't know if maybe that's it, but upon me watching this for the first time, I was very impressed with the quality that we had gotten of monster that we get from this, because it's like, I was expecting to kind of go and be like, oh, okay, usually at this point, if it's something really good, we've at least heard about it at some point, you know, whether it's a random list or an article or just on Twitter or whatever. But this monster, to my knowledge, at least a few years ago prior to watching it, I never even heard of the quality of monster that we were getting. So I was like, how do people not talk about this more? And it's like I still haven't heard that much, uh, a lot of commentary on it. I don't know if it's just the film isn't seen a lot, and that's why it kind of goes overlooked. But for me, my money's on this for being the most overlooked monster.
It's niche. I mean, like if you look at anything when it comes to these movies, like there, I would say as far as the Lovecraft, maybe this might be blasphemous, and I could get lit up in the comments for saying this, but like, um, is Reanimator the most well-known Lovecraft adaptation? I don't know. So I mean, like, but we got NECA figures for him at least, you know. And I mean, it's just one of those things where it's just kind of like, do I think that this monster is overlooked? I absolutely do. I think I agree with you 100%. Because it's something where it's like prior to this movie, I didn't really know anything about it. You know, it's not something that I had other than seeing the images on the cover and stuff like that. That's about all I saw.
Yeah,
So I think you're spot on there. Um, but yeah, I think this movie needs to get its due. When we get into our final thoughts of it, I'll definitely touch on that a little bit more. Um, but I mean, I guess to wrap up my little portion here, do I think that Dr. Pretorius is getting a NECA figure anytime soon? Probably not. Because we're just now in talks about getting the Thing creature figure, and we just got McCready last year. So
yeah,
it's like if it's taking that long for a movie with like the same level of presentation and effects to get figures or the icon status of that creature, um yeah, it's gonna be a while. It would be a longer road, which I think is great, which is why we're covering this movie in a portion to it. When we get to that final section, I'll touch on that more too, but it's something that I think this movie is overlooked in general.
yeah. And I think maybe it also has to do like H.P. Lovecraft in general is it's an acquired taste. So it's like
Niche.
just because
Yeah.
you know, you like Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers or anything like that, it doesn't mean you're gonna like H.P. Lovecraft, you know? So it's like um it probably is a unique subgenre to be a lot of people haven't seen it. I think even to an extent, Reanimator is an acquired taste where you're either on board with it or you're not on board with it, even though it's pretty well known in the horror community.
Mhm.
I feel like it's probably one of those you either really like it or you don't care for it too much because you're not really getting the basics in terms of horror with that. So same thing with From Beyond, where this is probably even more. This is more amplified than Reanimator. So it's like you either like it or you're not really into it. So I can see why it goes overlooked. I mean, a lot of people may have turned this movie off before we even got to the Pretorius monster. You know, so it's like you don't even know what is happening in 20 minutes into this film because it is so weird. Plus, with Stuart Gordon, I can see again, he's a unique filmmaker where it's like a lot of things that he does is sexual in connotation. So some people may not be into that. They may stay away from it just because of Stuart Gordon directing it. So it's like, you know, I think this movie may have a few strikes against it for a general horror audience, just to kind of be like, I don't know if I'm into that. I really have to be in the mood to enjoy H.P. Lovecraft and Stuart Gordon. So I can see why it would go overlooked. It's a unique subgenre within horror, I think.
No, I definitely agree. I think that it's a little overlooked. And as far as the creatures go in this film, like they get an A for me. Like I think that they're really great effects. They're really unique. Something I haven't seen before. And even though I make that connection with the final Pretorius monster and Grant, it's still from Slither. It's still its own beast at the end of the day. Especially how they finish him off.
Yeah.
Just with Jeffrey Combs's character Crawford climbing back out of him and fighting for dominance of the body. Like Jesus, what an effect! Like
And
seriously, one of those chef's kiss. Like you guys did excellent there with that effect.
you know how, especially, you know, we were talking about the new blood and how much of a nightmare that film was in terms of things being cut, and we have high hopes for doing a lot of gore into that, and then it's like, oh no, we can't do any of that, and we kind of have to reroute. Where this film, I know, kind of did have also a field day in terms of things being cut and stuff like that. But one of the things for me, it's like that ending scene with Pretorius and Crawford kind of almost melded together, and they're kind of just like, skulls are coming apart and they're kind of gooping together and stuff like that, where it's gory, but it's not human gore, where it's just like this disgusting goop. I'm always curious on how that kind of goes, because it almost is extraterrestrial in a sense where we're not really dealing with human flesh at that point. It's just kind of this disgusting, almost gelatin like wetness, kind of soupiness going together, which to me is, I love seeing it, but it's so gross just to see their faces kind of meld together, especially with a character like you had said. You're expecting them all to die, and for me, I was expecting Crawford and Catherine to kind of get out. I thought maybe that's how that was going to go. So it's to see, especially Crawford, in a sense where, at first you think he's dead, and then he comes crawling out of the Pretorius monster, and then he's kind of pulled back in, and then that fight ensues, and then he's gone for good. At that point, it's kind of like a fake out, and then we finally get it.
When they turn into just the skulls fighting for
Yeah.
dominance, again, very Sam Raimi like in that presentation. But like it was definitely one of those things where it was scratching an itch for me, where I was like, that's some cool shit. Like that is why we prefer practical effects in this house.
Yeah, and I love the stuff, like how they filmed it too, where it's a lot of close-ups. It's like at that point you lose the humanness of it, and I think that's kind of a bold take in a sense where it's just this giant melding together close-up shots of you don't exactly know what's going on, and then to have your for the most part, your main character, being defeated in a sense. I think that was a very unique take on that, where you don't really see that that often. I can see that kind of being an acquired taste as well, where yeah, we're really into the H.P. Lovecraft kind of feel at that point.
Yes, definitely. I would agree with you there. And then, I mean, one more effect I want to highlight just because it popped up in my head and I don't want to lose it is directly at the end when Barbara falls out of the, Barbara Gordon's character falls out of the window. Did you notice her kneecap?
No,
Oh my
I don't
God,
think
that
so.
thing is mangled. Like if you go back and watch this movie like that, I caught that. Um, just like watching it, I was like, holy shit. Like it's that detail that I like about it. Like that's the stuff I appreciate from Stuart Gordon here, is just that, like, people fall out of windows all the time in movies, regular people and all the same. And normally they can just roll it off and somersault and be like, oh, see, maybe I sprained my ankle or whatever. No, she fucking busted her kneecap open, dude. Like it's on there. Um,
I'm
you'll have to definitely pay attention to it because it's
I'm
just a really
definitely
gross effect. It
I'm gonna go back and watch that, because it's like that. Those details are so nice to be added in, especially when I don't know if you watched the commentary or anything or read up on it, but they very much run out of money in this
mhm.
film. So it's like at some points, I mean, you can tell with some of the effects where it's like, okay, I'm assuming like the eels, at the very beginning, stuff like that's probably a product of we don't have the budget anymore. So to kind of get the quality of what they did come up with a very limited budget, because this isn't a Friday the 13th or a Nightmare on Elm Street where it's like people are flocking to the theater to see this. We know we're going to make our money back, which I don't think they made their money back in this film. So it's like, we're really taking a chance here, and maybe someone will see it, maybe not, because H.P. Lovecraft has been around, but, you don't slap H.P. Lovecraft on something and say, I'm going, there's going to be a mass theater here. People are going to
No,
want to
it's
come
it's
see this.
extremely niche, which is why I think like a movie like Underwater nowadays didn't push that so much in its marketing. It left itself mysterious.
Yeah.
So that way people could come in and be surprised, which I think, like I said, is doing well for the movie as it goes along. That movie has been very, a lot of people have finally flipped on it because I think it came out at a rough time too. I want to say that came out, what, 2 or 3 weeks before all hell started breaking loose in the
Yeah, I
United
think
States
so.
with COVID. So, it's one of those things where it's like it definitely kind of has coasted off gracefully here. Now that people have kind of calmed down and are going back and looking at some of this stuff.
And I mean, that's where it's like, H.P. Lovecraft, even if you don't stay true to a short story for him, there's so much lore there that you can kind of build your own if you feel like it. It's like choose your own adventure style, because he wrote so much vague things where it's like it really is a product of where does your head go
Mhm.
after you're inspired by something. And I think that's what I like about his material so much, is that it really does allow you to kind of get in your own head and kind of think about things and kind of come up with, if I had read from beyond the short story, where would I have went with it? Because
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have gotten any of this out of it. So it's like, really H.P. Lovecraft, I think, inspires so much creativity when you get down to the bare bones and you kind of dissect a lot of his ideas. But,
100%.
we've been through the cast, we've been through the effects. So now it only leaves for I got to put on my white gloves. Dylan, you got to get on your hospital gown, because we are hopping into Dr. McMichael's examination room.
Off his head. Oh my God, gingerbread man.
That's one of my favorite lines in this entire movie. Just the
I
way
love the
it's
music.
presented and everything. Oh yeah.
It's like that music to the gingerbread man is like, oh man, they put an emphasis on that. I love it.
Yeah, no, they were definitely having a lot of fun with that one, but like it's just one of those scenes where it's like I definitely could see people being like, "Oh, like this is super cheesy and stuff," but I think it's of its time and I think
Yeah.
it works really well. And I'm not sitting here saying that like it's supposed to be taken serious. So it's like if you're trying to take that stuff seriously, then you're not here for the fun. You're not here to
Yeah,
watch
I
this
think
movie.
yeah, I think they're very much trying to make their own film, have a little bit of fun with it, and do some cool effects and unique story. And it's like I think that's what they set out to do, and I think that's what they achieved. That's kind of why I wanted you to see this movie, because it's one of those ones I dust off every few months just to put on, just kind of lose myself in it, because I think there's a lot of fun stuff in here, from effects to acting, the cast alone, just the story matter. And again, I respect the hell out of it for being a 7-page story, and we tackle that in the very opening credits of it, and then we kind of go and do our own thing with this. So, I think that's why for me this film feels so unique and so new.
And I appreciate the recommendation. It's always nice to watch stuff that I haven't seen before. Like I love watching things that we've seen obviously 100 times because we can go so deep into it. But like just coming in this nice and fresh was definitely exciting for me, and it's great. I mean, it's just another one of those movies where it's like I will definitely put this in my rotation whenever I feel like some body horror or some Lovecraft or anything like that. It's just nice to be a part of the From Beyond Club now, I guess is kind of how I'm saying it. So like if
We
you
have to
want
get
my
you a
final
pin.
thoughts, I would say definitely I highly recommend this to any Lovecraft fan, anybody who likes movies that have to deal with things like body horror or just really subject matter that makes you uncomfortable and just like your skin crawl. This is definitely one of those movies. But at the same time, it leaves itself with this air of mystery and just like you never fully understand what's going on, why it's happening, other than that there's a machine they built that gets them to this other reality, and this is what it is. And it's just one of those things where it's not handled like a Doctor Strange or anything like that. It is handled in the most horrific way possible. You know what I mean? Like you can have fun with like multiverse and like, we're going into another reality, but this is definitely showing you what happens if we open this up and there's just this twisted realm where your body just like morphs and changes and becomes something entirely different, and you have to reap the consequences of it. I think the
Yeah.
cast is stellar. I think that Stuart Gordon's done an excellent job again, tackling this material, expanding upon it, creating characters that are awesome, that are I just enjoy following, and just making the most for what he's got as far as his locations and budget and everything. it feels like you could put this in a pack with Reanimator, and I would say that these definitely feel like they could have taken place in an adjacent town or, you know, whatever, to where any of the other films take place. Like,
Yeah.
I honestly just wish that Stuart Gordon kind of got to do more movies like this after this that kind of have the same feel, because they almost feel like, if I had to put this into my own thoughts, this feels like it's in its own little bottle.
Yeah.
And like it's just that one brief moment in time where you had this and Reanimator, and they're just both perfect for very different reasons and some of the same reasons, but they just really sold it to me. And I gotta say, like, I'm just really happy I got to check it out.
Yeah, and this was like one of those. I think it was a product because I haven't seen Castle Freak. We kind of talked about before we turned the mics on, and then Dagon I had seen, but that's not really part of this whole Barbara Crampton, Jeffrey Combs kind of deal here. But it's like I'm assuming I know from beyond looking at the financials, they didn't make their money back. So whatever hopes Stuart Gordon had of maybe making a lot of usual suspects in HP Lovecraft universe, continuously kind of anthology deals, whatever hopes he had, I'm sure were dashed after this film, which, I really wish they made, if there was a core set, that they would have stayed that course just to see what else he tackles, because, I think there is a giant space for HP Lovecraft properties out there, to kind of the adaptations of it, to kind of see what other filmmakers come up with. But, obviously we didn't get that. But it would have been such an intriguing kind of maybe 10-year run if we did, just to see what that would have looked like from Stuart Gordon, because I think there was a lot left in the tank in terms of HP Lovecraft. And kind of, you can tell from Castle Freak, Dagon. I think he had done something else for the Masters of Horror, which was another H.P. Lovecraft thing. He definitely had a love for it, and he wanted to continue doing it. It just probably financially wasn't there for him to do it, which is, such a mistake, but 'tis what it is, I suppose. But, I think this film's a lot of fun. I'm curious to see, I don't know in terms of inspirations on who has been inspired and who has not, but thinking about this film, I was like, we've talked about it on so many different properties where it's like, oh man, this would be fun to kind of open up and see what you get in terms of a series or anything like that. And I'm always curious to see if Stranger Things had been inspired in any sense from this, just because of that whole other realm, things living in existence upside down type deals, where I'm curious if that had any inspirations in terms of that TV show or not, just because you can kind of draw some comparisons to that. It seems very interesting if they were.
Yeah, I don't know about Stranger Things necessarily, because I feel like that wants to hit you with that nostalgia based stuff, where it's like, even in the third season we had a lot of people comparing that one character to the Terminator, and it's just one of those things where it's kind of like, I feel like they try to hit those broader, bigger titles. So I don't know if I'd necessarily say that this connects with that, but it would be really cool in this new season to see them kind of, take from some of these more obscure 80s horror flicks and really just
Yeah,
kind of dive into that. I feel like that's something they haven't really done on the show.
yeah.
Um, but I mean, yeah, I definitely appreciate you bringing this one to the table and me getting to see this and kind of add this to my conversation now, and just being able to say, like, if anybody's looking for anything Lovecraft or anything like that, I can say, hey, From Beyond is a pretty sick flick, and I like watching it.
And the perfect thing is that it is streaming usually somewhere at some point, because the Blu-ray is pretty hard to get.
Yes.
Which in the commentary, because I listened to for the screenwriter from Dennis Paoli, he had actually talked about it as a credits roll, that the VHS version of this was the only one in existence for a very long time,
Wow.
because there were no prints available for this. They had all been destroyed, and then they found one, and from that one, the DVDs and Blu-rays had been replicated and produced, and that's how we ended up getting the Scream Factory version. So it's just interesting how it's like, yep, if that one print did not exist, we would not have the Blu-ray.
It blows my mind just how abused and just some of these properties and their films are after they've been distributed. Like some of these studios, like I don't know if you'd ever find a studio that would do that nowadays, with just how things have gone in the industry
Yeah.
and just how people have come back to things. Like I feel like they're very protective of any and all properties that they have, whether they work or don't, because you never know when they could come back up. So like the fact that they were just like this, all this effort, all this everything that was put into this movie was at one point just tossed aside is just baffling to me.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, if we didn't have this one VHS tape, like then we're not talking about this movie right now, but possibly.
And it's funny, this has nothing to do with horror, but it may be a little anecdote that you may be interested in. So, I'm a big pro wrestling fan. So there's a lot of pro wrestling out there. Once a match happens, if they film it, so it's on a VHS tape, and that's what we have. We have this one VHS tape. So they didn't care back, in the 80s, 70s, whatever. They would film something, put it on television. They didn't want to go buy another VHS tape. They would just tape over it. So that stuff is lost forever. So it aired on television, and then it's just gone, and that's it. It's like I can't imagine, filming something, having one thing of it, and then just disregarding it. Same thing with film. Like I don't know how you get from a print. There had to be multiple prints. It's like I can't imagine just tossing them out or storing them so horribly that they molded or were unusable to a certain degree. It's like that's unique work right there. You want to preserve it in a sense. It's baffling sometimes.
I 100% agree. I couldn't be more on board with that statement of just film preservation is a huge thing. I know a lot of directors, especially the older ones, have gotten up to making that more of a priority nowadays, but especially with our technology, the conversions and everything we're able to do. Like, I mean, at this point, if we can put Wizard of Oz in HD and on 4K, then like we can do anything. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
like, why not? So, film preservation is huge, and I'm happy this got saved, but it does make me wonder what didn't. Like, what
Yeah.
gem of a film are we never going to see because no prints of it exist? All we know is that it was released, it flopped, and it's brilliant, and people just didn't understand it at the time.
Yeah, because I'm sure there are a few things on VHS that'll never be transferred over to DVD or Blu-ray or anything like that, just because it probably doesn't exist anymore.
I 100% I believe that wholeheartedly, just based off of the reputation and kind of what they had been doing and what has been known about the past and film preservation not being taken so seriously, especially in a time when it did dissolve and it did go down in quality as time went on, and it's just like now you can save anything to a hard drive and you can just keep it, and then you've got it forever. So, and you just make
Yeah,
infinite copies of it. So I hope that that's a thing of the past, but we'll see.
time will tell.
Time
Well,
will
I
tell.
think that wraps us up for From Beyond. I think I had my stamp of approval going into this, and now I think we have Dylan's stamp of approval.
I 100%
Thumbs
give
up.
this a fresh rating. Definitely check this out if you're a fan. I mean, if you made it this far into the podcast, I'm sure you are a fan, or if you just got a bunch of it spoiled for you, still give it a shot. It's a good ride. It's fun. It's enjoyable.
It's a good time, especially even if you're not for the story matter. Check it out for the effects alone. I think they still hold up. They're great. Yeah. So at this time, it's streaming on a couple different services as we record this now. And if it's not at this time, wait a month, and I'm sure it'll pop up, and you'll be able to find it. But yeah. So we will be back here next time. And Dylan, you want to wrap us up here?
Oh, absolutely. And definitely take a look at our Twitter. We got it down there at the bottom at SplatterCast Pod. That's where we're trying to keep in touch with everybody. We're still new to this. So like, I mean, we're not new to it, but this format and everything is still new to us. So we are definitely taking all criticisms, feedback, anything you guys can do to help us get better. We just want to create a watchable, decent, good show. We just love doing this. So it's like if I could just make it, that much better for you guys, that much more watchable, I want to do that.
Well,
Um,
I only take positive information. Bombard Dylan with all the negative. He loves it. He
I
thrives on
do.
it.
I love the abuse. It makes me so happy to get shit
He'd
on
be in
over
Dr.
there
Pretorius's little room over there. He loves the abuse.
in the comment section. But yeah, but thank you for checking us out if you've watched this far. And if you would please be so kind to hit that bell and subscribe for us. We want to bring these shows. We have more supplemental videos coming your way. And yeah, I mean, we're just trying to keep it in here and keep it up to date with all the horror news, horror films coming out over this year. We got a couple of interesting ones. I know A24 put out a trailer for Bodies, Bodies, Bodies recently, which has an interesting concept. So we'll get some recent stuff in there as time goes on, and we will definitely be taking more deep dives into these kind of off the beaten path horror flicks like Abominable and From Beyond as we continue.
Always a
But,
fun time.
Yeah, I would say that about wraps us up. So thank you for watching. And once again, I'm Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco. And remember, we all go a little mad sometimes. I got it.